The autumn chill cut through Rylan Ashford's worn leather coat as he sat on his children's beds, a storybook clutched in his trembling hands, tears streaming down his weathered face as memories of his late wife, Sarah, haunted every page they once read together. It had been 6 months since the fever took her, leaving him alone with 2 small children on their modest ranch outside Silverwood, Colorado. The year was 1878, and surviving the frontier was hard enough with 2 parents with just one. It sometimes felt impossible. "Pa, why are you crying?" asked 5-year-old Emma, her small hand reaching up to touch her father's stubbled cheek. Beside her, 3-year-old Thomas clutched his worn stuffed rabbit, eyes wide with concern. Rylan quickly wiped his eyes with his sleeve. "Just dust in my eyes, sweetheart." He forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Now, where were we in the story?" But before he could continue, Emma shook her head. "You always say that, Pa. But you miss Mama." "I miss her too." Rylan's throat tightened. "How did you explain death to children so young? How did you tell them that their mother would never return, that the hollow feeling in their home would never truly go away?" "Yes, I miss your Mama something fierce," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "She was better at this than me. The stories, the tucking in." Thomas clutched his rabbit tighter. "No story tonight." Rylan looked down at the book, the words blurring through his tears. He'd been working since dawn, breaking new horses for the Henderson farm, and exhaustion weighed on him like an anvil. But his children needed more than he could give right now. A knock at the front door startled them all. "Stay here," Rylan said, placing the book down and making his way through their small ranch house. When he opened the door, he found Penelope Vaughn standing on his porch, her chestnut hair tucked beneath a simple bonnet, her arms full with a covered basket. She'd arrived in Silverwood 3 months ago to take over as the town's new schoolteacher. Emma had started attending lessons just weeks before. "Miss Vaughn," Rylan said, surprise evident in his voice. "Is everything all right?" Penelope offered a warm smile. "Mr. Ashford, I hope I'm not intruding. Emma mentioned that you've been having some difficult evenings, and I thought perhaps—" She lifted the basket slightly. "I've brought some fresh bread and preserves for breakfast tomorrow, and—" She hesitated. "Emma said you sometimes have trouble with the bedtime stories." Rylan felt a flush of embarrassment creep up his neck. Had he been so transparent that even his daughter's schoolteacher knew of his struggles? "That's mighty kind of you, but we're managing just fine," he said stiffly, pride making his words sharper than intended. Penelope's smile didn't falter. "Of course you are. But everyone needs a hand sometimes, Mr. Ashford. Even the strongest among us." Before he could respond, Emma's voice called out from behind him. "Miss Vaughn." The little girl appeared at his side, her nightgown billowing around her small frame. "Did you bring books?" Penelope's eyes crinkled with genuine warmth. "I did bring one special one. Would you like to hear it?" Thomas appeared beside his sister, clutching his rabbit. "Story?" he asked hopefully. Rylan found himself caught between his pride and the pleading eyes of his children. Finally, with a reluctant nod, he stepped aside. "Just one story, then." 20 minutes later, Rylan stood in the doorway of his children's room, watching in astonishment as Penelope sat between their beds, her voice rising and falling with the rhythm of the tale, bringing to life a story about a brave frontier girl who discovered a hidden valley full of wild horses. Emma and Thomas were entranced, their eyes growing heavier with each page, their earlier sadness forgotten in the magic of the story. When both children had finally drifted off to sleep, Penelope gently closed the book and tiptoed from the room. Rylan followed her to the main room of the house, suddenly aware of the disarray around them: unwashed dishes, scattered toys, clothes needing mending. "Thank you," he said simply, unsure what else to say. Penelope placed the book on the table. "They're wonderful children, Mr. Ashford. Emma is quite bright in her studies. Sarah, my wife, she taught her letters early," he said, his voice catching slightly on his wife's name. "I'm sorry for your loss," Penelope said softly. "Truly." Rylan nodded, not trusting himself to speak. "The book," she continued, gesturing to the volume she'd placed on the table. "Perhaps you could borrow it for a while. The children seem to enjoy it." "I couldn't possibly." "Please," she interrupted gently. "Books are meant to be shared. Return it when you're finished." As she prepared to leave, Rylan found himself reluctant to see her go. The house had felt lighter, somehow, during her brief visit. Miss Vaughn, he called as she stepped onto the porch. Perhaps you'd join us for Sunday dinner after church? As thanks for your kindness tonight. A smile bloomed across her face. I'd like that very much, Mr. Ashford. As he watched her walk down the path toward her waiting horse and buggy, Rylan felt something stir within him, something he'd thought had died alongside Sarah. It wasn't love, not yet, but perhaps it was the possibility of it. And for the first time in 6 months, that possibility didn't feel like a betrayal. Sunday dinner became a weekly tradition. Penelope would arrive after church services, sometimes bringing fresh baked pies or books from the small school library. She'd help prepare the meal, engaging Emma and Thomas in simple tasks that made them giggle with delight. After dinner, she'd read to the children, her expressive voice bringing characters to life in ways that Rylan never could. One Sunday in late October, as Penelope helped Emma knead dough for biscuits, Rylan found himself studying her, the gentle way she guided his daughter's small hands, the patience in her voice as she explained the process, the stray curl that had escaped her normally tidy bun. She'd become a fixture in their lives so quickly, filling spaces he hadn't even realized were empty. You're staring, Mr. Ashford, Penelope said without looking up, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Rylan, he corrected, suddenly feeling foolish for the formality they still maintained after weeks of these dinners. Please, call me Rylan. She glanced up, flour dusting her cheek. Then I insist you call me Penelope. That evening, after the children were asleep, they sat before the fireplace, the autumn chill kept at bay by the crackling flames. Penelope was mending one of Thomas's shirts, her fingers moving deftly with needle and thread. May I ask you something personal? Rylan ventured, breaking the comfortable silence. She looked up, her hands stilling. Of course. Why did you come to Silverwood? It's hardly the most prosperous town in Colorado. Penelope's gaze returned to her mending, but her fingers remained motionless. I needed a fresh start, she said simply. My father was a teacher in Boston. When he passed last year, there was nothing keeping me there. The school board here was desperate enough to hire a female teacher without too many questions. You're an excellent teacher, Rylan said. Emma talks about your lessons constantly. A smile touched her lips. Thank you. I love teaching, but... She hesitated. But sometimes I wonder if it's enough. If I'm enough. She set the mending aside. In Boston, I was approaching spinsterhood at 26. My mother had 3 children by my age. Sometimes I fear I chose teaching because it was safe, not because it was my calling. Rylan leaned forward. And what do you think your calling might be, if not teaching? Her eyes met his, uncertainty and something deeper swimming in their brown depths. Family, she admitted quietly. I've always wanted children of my own. The air between them seemed to grow thick with unspoken possibilities. Rylan felt his heart hammering against his ribs, words he wasn't ready to speak pressing against his lips. The moment was broken by a small voice from the hallway. Pa. They both turned to see Thomas standing in his nightshirt, his rabbit dangling from one hand, his face streaked with tears. What is it, son? Rylan asked, rising from his chair. Bad dream, Thomas whimpered. About Mama. Rylan crossed the room and lifted his son into his arms, feeling the small body tremble against his chest. It's all right, he murmured, stroking the boy's back. It was just a dream. Can Miss Penny read more story? Thomas asked, his face buried in his father's shoulder. Rylan looked to Penelope, apology in his eyes. It's getting late, I'd be happy to, she interrupted, already reaching for one of the books she'd brought. Just one more short story. As they settled Thomas back into bed, careful not to wake Emma, Penelope began reading a gentle tale about a family of rabbits. Rylan sat on the edge of Thomas's bed, watching his son's eyelids grow heavy, the tension slowly leaving his little body. But more than that, he watched Penelope, the tenderness in her expression, the natural way she seemed to know exactly what his children needed. In that moment, something shifted inside him. The guilt that had been his constant companion since Sarah's death eased just slightly, making room for something new to grow. When Thomas was finally asleep again, they tiptoed from the room. In the narrow hallway, they found themselves standing closer than propriety might allow. Rylan could smell the lavender soap she used, could see the faint freckles across the bridge of her nose. Thank you, he whispered, not just for tonight, but for everything she'd brought into their lives these past weeks. Penelope's gaze lifted to meet his. They're wonderful children, Rylan. You're doing a remarkable job with them, despite what you might think. I couldn't do it without your help, he admitted. Not nearly as well, anyway. A flush crept into her cheeks. I should go? It's getting late. Stay, he said, the word escaping before he could think better of it. Seeing her startled expression, he quickly added, I mean the spare room. It's too dark for you to ride back to town alone. The invitation hung between them, weighted with implications neither was ready to address directly. I wouldn't want to cause gossip, she said carefully. Rylan ran a hand through his hair. You're right. I wasn't thinking clearly. I'll hitch up the wagon and drive you home. But as they stepped onto the porch, they found that a light snow had begun to fall, the first of the season, turning the world silver in the moonlight. It's beautiful, Penelope breathed, extending her hand to catch a snowflake. Rylan watched her, backlit by the warm glow from inside his home, snowflakes catching in her hair, and felt something break open inside him, something that had been locked away since the day they'd laid Sarah to rest. Penelope, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I think I'm falling in love with you. The words hung in the cold air between them, as delicate and tremulous as the snowflakes. Her eyes widened, lips parting in surprise. For one terrible moment, Rylan feared he'd misread everything, destroyed the friendship they'd built. Then she stepped toward him, closing the distance between them. I think, she said softly, I've already fallen in love with you. And with Emma and Thomas. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, a question being asked and answered in the same breath. When they pulled apart, snowflakes melting on their eyelashes, Rylan felt something he'd thought forever lost. Hope. Stay, he said again, this time with different meaning. Not tonight, but in our lives. Permanently. Are you proposing, Rylan Ashford? A smile played at her lips, but her eyes were serious. Inelegantly, perhaps, he admitted. But yes, I think I am. Their courtship unfolded through the winter months, conducted primarily under the watchful eyes of Emma and Thomas, who quickly became Penelope's most ardent supporters. Emma, especially, attached herself to Penelope with fierce devotion, soaking up the maternal attention she'd been missing. It wasn't always smooth. There were nights when Rylan would wake from dreams of Sarah, guilt washing over him anew. There were moments when the children would mention their mother, and a shadow would cross Penelope's face, not jealousy, but uncertainty about her place in this family formed before her arrival. One particularly difficult evening in January, after Penelope had gone home, Emma had a meltdown at bedtime. I want Miss Penny to read to me, not you. She shouted at Rylan, throwing her book across the room. Emma Marie Ashford, Rylan said sternly, though the outburst cut him deeper than she could know. We do not throw things in this house. I don't care. Miss Penny does the voices better. She does everything better. Emma's face crumpled. Why can't she just be here all the time? Why can't she be our new mama? Rylan sat heavily on his daughter's bed, gathering her resistant body into his arms. Is that what you want? For Miss Penny to be your new mama? Emma sniffled against his chest. Would Mama in heaven be mad? The question pierced Rylan's heart. No, sweetheart, he said, his voice thick. Your mama loved you more than anything in this world. She would want you to be happy, to be loved. Miss Penny loves us, Emma said with the simple certainty of childhood. And she makes you smile again, Pa. Out of the mouths of babes, Rylan thought. His daughter had distilled the situation to its essence in a way adults often couldn't. The next day, Rylan rode into town early, stopping first at the small jewelry shop where he purchased a simple gold band with a single modest pearl. His next stop was the school, where he waited patiently for the children to be dismissed before approaching Penelope at her desk. This is a pleasant surprise, she said, smile lighting her face. Is everything all right? Everything is better than all right, he said, taking her hand. Emma made me realize something last night. We're not just courting, Penelope. We're building a family. The children need you. I need you. He dropped to one knee, there in her classroom with the afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows. Penelope Vaughn, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Of becoming a mother to Emma and Thomas? Of making our house a home again? Tears filled her eyes as she nodded, words momentarily beyond her. When he slipped the ring onto her finger, she finally found her voice. Yes, she whispered. Yes to all of it. They were married on a crisp March afternoon in 1879 in the small white church at the center of Silverwood. Emma served as flower girl, scattering petals with theatrical flair, while Thomas carried the rings on a small velvet pillow, his expression solemn with the importance of his task. The whole town turned out for the celebration that followed. Penelope had become a beloved figure in the community, not just as the schoolteacher, but as the woman who had brought light back into the widowed Rylan Ashford's life. The children, too, blossomed under her care, their early grief softened by her gentle presence. Their first night as husband and wife, after the children were asleep in their beds, Rylan and Penelope stood in the doorway of the master bedroom, the room that had once been his and Sarah's. Penelope had helped him prepare it earlier that week, packing away Sarah's remaining belongings with reverent care, making space for this new chapter without erasing what came before. "Are you certain you're ready?" Penelope asked softly, understanding the significance of this threshold. Rylan took her hand, bringing it to his lips. "Sarah will always be a part of me, a part of this family," he said honestly. "But my heart has room for new love, Penelope. It has room for you." That night, as they learned each other as husband and wife, the last walls around Rylan's heart crumbled. In Penelope's arms, he found not just passion but healing, a completion he hadn't thought possible again. The seasons turned, bringing changes to the Ashford ranch. With Penelope's savings and Rylan's hard work, they added 2 new rooms to the house, a proper study for Penelope's teaching materials, and a nursery that, by the following spring, welcomed baby James Ashford into the world. Emma and Thomas adored their new brother, proudly showing him off to anyone who would look. Emma, now 7, took her role as big sister seriously, reading to the baby from her school books each evening. "He's too little to understand," Rylan teased one night, watching his daughter carefully enunciating each word to the gurgling infant. "Miss Penny, I mean. Mama says babies learn from hearing words." Emma corrected him with the authority of someone repeating a trusted source. "And anyway, I'm practicing my reading." Penelope, entering the room with a basket of mending, caught Rylan's eye and smiled. The transition to calling her Mama had been gradual and natural for the children, with occasional slips back to Miss Penny when they were excited or tired. "Your sister is right," Penelope said, settling into the rocking chair by the fireplace. "Keep reading, Emma. You're doing wonderfully." Later that night, with the house quiet and the children asleep, Rylan and Penelope sat on the porch swing, baby James cradled in his father's arms. The summer stars stretched across the Colorado sky, brilliant and endless. "Do you ever regret it?" Rylan asked suddenly. "Marrying a widower with 2 children? Taking on so much responsibility all at once?" Penelope leaned her head against his shoulder, her hand coming to rest on the baby's small back. "Not for a single moment," she said. "This life, our family, it's everything I ever wanted and more than I dared hope for." Rylan pressed a kiss to her temple. "When Sarah died, I thought my heart went with her. I couldn't imagine loving anyone again." He gazed down at his sleeping son, then across the yard to the window where Emma and Thomas slept. "But love isn't a finite resource, is it? It expands to fill the space we give it." "That's beautifully said," Penelope murmured. "I had a good teacher," he replied, smiling. "A certain schoolmarm who taught me that hearts can heal, that families can grow in unexpected ways." As they sat together under the stars, their sleeping baby between them and their children safe inside, Rylan reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From those early days of grief, when he'd sat on his children's beds with tears streaming down his face, unable to finish a simple bedtime story, to this moment of quiet contentment, it seemed both a lifetime and merely a blink. The following autumn marked 2 years since Penelope had first knocked on his door with a basket of bread and a book of stories. To celebrate, they hosted a harvest dinner for the entire town, their expanded home filled with laughter and friendship. As evening fell and the guests began to depart, Penelope found Rylan standing by the corral, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. "Everyone's gone except for the Hendersons, and Margaret is helping clean up the last of the dishes," she said, wrapping her arms around his waist from behind. Rylan covered her hands with his own. "It was a good day. A perfect day," she agreed. "Though I think Thomas may have eaten his weight in apple pie." Rylan chuckled. He's got his father's appetite. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the light fade from the sky, the first stars beginning to appear. The children want stories tonight, Penelope said eventually. All three of them. Even James was babbling Tori, when I put him in his crib for his nap. He's too young to be talking, Rylan protested, though pride colored his voice. Apparently no one told him that. Penelope laughed. He's determined to keep up with Emma and Thomas. Rylan turned in her arms, studying her face in the fading light. Have I told you today how much I love you? You might have mentioned it once or twice, she teased, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. But I never tire of hearing it. I love you, Penelope Ashford, he said solemnly. You brought light back into our lives when I thought the darkness would never lift. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. And you gave me the family I always dreamed of. I love you, Rylan. I love our children. All of them. As darkness settled over the Colorado frontier, they walked hand in hand back to their home, where three children waited for bedtime stories that would be read without tears, stories that would carry them into sleep with visions of adventure and possibility. In the years to come, there would be more children, more stories, more challenges and triumphs. The Ashford Ranch would grow and prosper. Emma would eventually become a teacher like her beloved stepmother. Thomas would develop his father's way with horses. James and his younger siblings would create their own paths. But through it all, Rylan and Penelope would remember those early days, the widowed cowboy with tears in his eyes, the schoolteacher with stories to share, and the healing power of love that had brought them together on an autumn night when hope seemed as distant as the stars.